It's our 30th year, right? 30th year. And so that alone tells us it is a big year ahead of us. And so as I was pondering over what this year might look like, I thought about three things, CICC at 30. And the first thing would be strengthening the family. And the second would be serving the community. And the third will simply be Jesus is the key. He is still the cornerstone. And so as we approach this year, it's going to be those three things. Jesus the key to it all. We strengthen our families here in this church, and we serve our community not only with the gospel, but with our good works, and try to bless our community. And so this first quarter of 2018, you'll hear messages concerning the family. And it's going to begin with some basic things, and you probably are saying, this is so basic, it no longer really applies to me, and that is true. One of the challenges in this church is that many are grandfathers, grandmothers, many are older adults with adult children. We have a few who are young adults, young families with children. Some are children, youth. We have a few young adults. We have lots of children, and there'll be more children. And therefore, to preach a message on the family is not so easy, especially as we look at the individual members of that family. But you see, we are a community of faith. And part of being a community of faith is that we need to learn what our roles are in this family of God so that we can account to each other, encourage one another in those various roles. And so today, when I talk about the man, I'm talking about the husband as well as the father. It's not simply, only, exclusively about the man. It's also about the woman. It's also about the children. It's all about us. But as a community, we learn to understand what is the role of the man, what's the role of the father, what's the role of the husband in the family, so we can account for each other in this community. And so today, it's about the man and the strong family. And the picture I have of the man is simple. A shepherd, like a pastor. A shepherd, that's what the man looks like in his own family. And so let's begin with that. I remember a story where an angel appeared to a couple married together, celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and both of them were 65 years old. A 65-year-old couple celebrating their 40th anniversary, and suddenly an angel appeared and asked the wife, "What do you want for your anniversary?" And the wife simply said, "You know what? I've never been around the world." And so suddenly the angel flashed his sword, and boom, suddenly 2 round-trip tickets on her hand. You can fly, you can take the sea and cruise, you can do it by land. Anything you want around the world for 2. Wow, the woman said, incredible, what an anniversary gift. And so when the husband saw that, the husband took the angel aside and said, "You know, I'd like to be married to someone who's 30 years younger than I am." And so immediately the angel flashed his sword, and instantly the man became 95 years old. We're talking about you, the man. Now, you might be 95 years old in here. You might be 65. You might be 45. You might be 30. Nonetheless, this message is about you, but it's for all. You see, I'm concerned. I am concerned as your pastor. I was watching a commercial a while ago. You know the commercial? It's about a vehicle, Kia Sorento, 2016 television commercial. And in that commercial, the woman is driving with a family. And the husband is on the passenger seat in the front. Children are at the back. They're driving. The woman is driving. The wife is driving. And they're going to watch a football game. Have you seen that one? They're onto the football stadium in order to watch a game. And so they're looking for a parking slot. And the husband said, "There was one over there." And the wife, in her thoughts, not speaking aloud, in her thoughts, she was saying, "If you like a parking slot, we can go back home and just park at our garage." In her mind. And then suddenly she said, "There's no parking slot." And so I know what I'll do. I'll park this Sorrento up the grass. No slots, it's in the grass, upward on the hill. And then she goes down saying in her mind, someone's got to wear the pants in the family. Someone's got to wear the pants in the family. I'm even more concerned because we've not been taught. Well, the first concern is this: a reversal of roles in the family, especially here in America. That is the norm. Double income, easy reversal of roles. But I'm equally concerned, even more concerned, because if you are the same as me, I have never been taught how to be a Christian man. I have never been taught how to be a Christian husband. I've never been taught how to be a Christian father. I was left on my own to figure it out. And so I am growing up, I'm having a family, I'm trying to be the best dad I know how to be. But in the process, I'm really left to my native cultural style that have shaped me through the years to guide me in my way of being a husband and a father. And so I am now a parent, I am now a husband, but what has shaped me is my background, and now I'm in an environment where everything is reversed, and therefore I am extremely concerned because this is like a bombogenesis. Have you heard of that word recently? You're not reading the news, my brothers and sisters. The bomb cyclone on the East Coast. You remember that? You remember? You don't know what's happening on the East Coast? Oh dear. Well, there is this rapidly intensifying storm, right? There's a cold snap in the East Coast, from Florida all the way to Maine, right? It's called the bombogenesis. It's this rapid storm that has intensified and that has wreaked havoc on the East Coast. The family is like under a bombogenesis because we're left to our own native cultural styles of doing it by the grace of God. At the same time, the environment we face, the family is always under attack. You see, back from where I belong, there was a survey that came out concerning observations about the Filipino male. Maybe it's true also in other countries. But Filipino male have these 5 ingredients if they can be characterized by these 5 things. Number 1, do you want to know what the Filipino male is like? He's a mama's boy. Number 2, he always says this: anytime, my friend. In other words, the peer, this male group, this macho group, has an appeal to him, an attachment to him, that it's hard to say no to that group. Kahit kailan, kaibigan, basta ikaw. Number 3, he has a taste for blood. He is a violent man. Now you might think he's cool and calm and collected. He likes smooth interpersonal relationships. But mind you, if he can't control his own heart and temper anymore, it's gonna be violent. 4th, he's a distant father. Oh, he's there, but he's largely emotionally, psychologically absent, but he's there, but distant. And number 5, he always says this: I am not the problem. The problem is somewhere else. It is not I who has the problem. And so those 5 things characterize the male Filipino. And so if that is how I've been shaped in my cultural native country, and I'm not taught how to be a good man, a good Christian husband, a good Christian father, what's going to happen is a bombogenesis. And so here, I'm simply looking at basic stuff because I don't know where you are. And so some of you might think, we all know that already. And so I'm sorry, but let this be a reminder to each one of us. What's the shepherd of a strong family look like? Well, number 1, that lead shepherd of the family takes spiritual responsibility. And there's 3 things I want to share with you this morning about spiritual responsibility. Whether you like it or not, father, husband, you are the spiritual leader of the home. Now I know it's very native to us. We provide for the home. I mean, that's native, right? We all know that. So it's not about material. We all know that already. It's spiritual. You are the spiritual leader of the home. In Genesis 2, verse 7, you remember God formed the man. 16 and 17, God commands the man not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In other words, all the fruit you can eat except this one tree. This fruit you cannot eat. Knowledge of good and evil. And so he gives a command to man. Eve does not even exist yet. I was going to say Eve wasn't born yet. She wasn't born. She was taken out of the rib. That's a different kind of birth, isn't it? And when she was born, she was an adult. That's not the usual birth that we understand. And so Eve was not in the scene yet, and God commands the man, don't eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then, after the command, God took a rib out of the man, because it's not good for man to live alone, God said, and he fashioned the woman. And after God fashioned the woman, guess what? Now the man takes over. The man names her Isha, Eva, Eve, which is taken out from the word man, Ish. I am Ish, you are Isha in Hebrew. You're taken out of man. Now, why is it important to understand that sequence and the shift? You see, why didn't God simply name the woman himself? It's the man who names the woman. And you know the story after this. Both of them ate from the forbidden tree. They sinned. And when they sinned, to whom did God go first? Do you remember the story? You'll find that in verse 9 of chapter 3. He goes first, not to the one who ate first. He goes to the one he gave the command to first. And that is none other than the man, Adam. He has spiritual leadership responsibility for his wife, not the other way around. God holds the man accountable. The man stands as the priest of the family. God has placed the spiritual responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the man. But you see, what happens in many homes is the husband, the father, they are great in washing hands. Great. Just like Adam, when God said, well, where are you? Because they were hiding. Because now they saw they were naked. Who told you were naked? You know, because of the sin that happened after eating of that forbidden fruit. God says, where are you? And Adam said, remember what he said? The woman. And God goes to the woman, and God says, what happened? And the woman said, the serpent. No, you look at it. It really is. The man says the woman says the serpent. And when God goes to the serpent says, yes, I take responsibility. I did it. I'm the only one who takes responsibility here. I love it. Congratulate me. I'm the one who's responsible. Wow. You are the spiritual leader in your home. Not only that, you're also the spiritual gatekeeper of the house. You remember, what's the first sin in the Bible? And we think it's Eve eating the forbidden fruit. Is that the first sin? Sometimes I wonder, because I think there might have been a preceding sin, and the sin is this. It is the man's passivity. Because when Eve ate of that fruit, the man was there. It is not like the man didn't know. It was not as if the man was tending to his garden and flowers and eating of other fruits in other trees. He was right there with her, it says. And so what's going on? He stood there watching the serpent seduce his wife and doing nothing about it. That's why God holds him accountable. He was to be the spiritual gatekeeper of his wife, eventually of his own home. You know, when our children are bullied in school, when our children are bullied in the internet, Dad, you need to get involved. When kids are the bullies, dads need to be there to straighten things out. Don't just call your wife and say, you take care of it. You, the man, you are responsible. And God will hold you to it. You see, the devil attacked the first family, and he is relentless in the destruction of yours. And all we need to do is nothing. spiritual gatekeeper. The third is this: we're also spiritual reconcilers as dads, fathers, husbands. Here's how God thinks about conflict in the family. Malachi chapter 4, the words of the prophet goes this way. It's not written there yet, but before this verse, verse 5, it says, "Behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse." What does that mean? God is saying, if our homes are not reconciled, if fathers are not restored to their children, children are not restored to their fathers, it is an ultimate judgment. Now, I'm not saying that all of us in the family will be okay spiritually. I'm simply talking about reconciliation. Simple father-son, we're okay with each other. What does that say to us here who live here in this country, America? What does that leave us? Now, some of you may not have had a good father. Some of you might have no father at all, left you. And what do we do in that case? Well, I think what we do is simple. Hard as it is, the solution is easy. You accept the harsh reality, because you can't change that. You accept that harsh reality, you grieve over it, but nonetheless, you must make peace with your father or your children. Remember this: what you don't forgive, you're surely going to pass on. And so if you don't forgive today, that unforgiving spirit gets passed on and on and on. Erwin Lutzer suggested 3 objects that point to the powerful role of the man in the home. 3 objects. He says the first object that would describe our roles as men is this: we are mirrors. Mirrors. And he says this: you see, children perceive themselves in terms of how the father thinks and looks at them. And so when they think of their father, it reflects, this is how I am, according to how my father treats me. And therefore, if my father is an encouraging father, if my father is an honoring father, if my father stands alongside me in this cruel world, then I know I am of value as a child. But if my father is uncaring, if my father is abusive, if my father is absent, then you know what I'm thinking about myself? I'm thinking, you know what? I deserve all of that. You see, I'm a nobody. I'm a loser. You see, how you treat your child becomes the child, and therefore you are mirrors all the time. The second object is not a mirror, now it's a thermostat. And so the question is, what's the temperature that you set in your home? Is it cold? I love cold. My wife loves heater. I'll turn on the aircon, she'll turn on the heater. It's confusing. But there's spiritual temperature as well. And you, fathers, husbands, you are the thermostat. Do you keep it cold? You keep it cold where secrets are hidden, they are somehow packed deep inside, and they're not allowed to come out because it's a cold atmosphere? Nobody ought to be sharing feelings. Nobody ought to be sharing what's going on at home. It's cold and dreary. Or is it warm, set to warm, comfortable, enough so that we can indeed have a lively conversation, share what's going on in our lives? What is the thermostat that you, fathers, husbands, set in your home? The third object is a compass. A compass, in other words, the family ought to have direction. Where is it going? And it's the father who sets the direction. Where are we going as a family? Our family is being led to a greater spiritual understanding so that members know that they can truly depend on the father. They can depend on you, Dad, because you're setting the tone. You're setting the direction for your family. The lead shepherd takes spiritual responsibility. Here's the second one. The lead shepherd seeks personal integrity. Husbands, fathers, your responsibility as a shepherd to your homes boils down to two things. Here's the first, personal integrity. You remember Psalm 78? I preached on the first few verses at our family camp. But at the end of that chapter, Psalm 78, you have these words where God in history chose David to be their king. And when he chose David, this is what he said about David. He shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them with his skillful hands. Of course, it's about a dynasty, it's about a country, but it's about shepherding a family as well who will become a dynasty forever and ever. Shepherding with integrity. Now, sometimes integrity is not so easy to describe. I've preached many times on brokenness because that is the opposite of integrity. Having a life that is divided, duplicitous, that's the opposite of integrity. Integrity means one whole. And so I'll describe the lack of integrity because that's easier to grasp. What does it look like when you and I are not becoming the men of integrity that we ought to be? What does that look like? I call them breaches of integrity. Well, here are some observations I make about this life. Many of it comes from my own reflection of my life. Here's a breach of integrity when acts don't match with words. That's a breach of integrity. In other words, my word of honor doesn't mean anything anymore. You know, there was a time when you make a promise before the statue of Jose Rizal in Luneta, that was a bond, epoxy. It was a glue because you made a promise before the statue of Jose Rizal, our national hero. But those days are over, isn't it? Those days are over. The word of honor. And so we have the example of Ananias and Sapphira. Remember them when the early church, when they witnessed not only the resurrection of Jesus Christ, but the filling of the Holy Spirit in their lives. Oh man, what an eruption of the church. What did they do? The richer ones, they sold everything in order for the proceeds to come into a pool in the church so that they can help those who are underprivileged in the church. And there was this couple, Ananias and Sapphira. They saw this thing happening in the church. They, wow, isn't that great? Let's join in. And so they sold their own property. And they said to Peter, here's the entire proceeds of that property. And you know what happened next? Peter said, why is it that you have conceived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. Why? Because they really kept a portion. When our acts don't match our words, it's a breach of integrity. Here's another one. When our private and public life don't jive. In other words, in Tagalog, we call this pakitang tao. In other words, we show another self that is not really the true one. It's a show-off. Just like what Jesus said to the scribes and Pharisees, Matthew 23. He says, you hypocrites, for you are like, listen to this, you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you too outwardly appear righteous to men, inwardly you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Private and public don't jive. Now, it doesn't mean that we open everything about ourselves to everybody. There are, of course, some things that are held private, but there is consistency between what goes on inside and what goes on outside. I remember Parker Palmer, who wrote many books on brokenness. He's a Quaker, by the way. And he says something like this, he who hides divides. If you're one who likes hiding, you can't show that, can't show this. Oh, they're visiting, have to hide everything. Oh, don't tell them I'm here. No, if you're this kind of a person, he who hides eventually divides. He says, when I lead a divided life, the people around me, they pay a price as well. What he says is this, you see, when we live this kind of life, there's a fault line, just like a fault line when there's an earthquake. There's a San Andreas fault, right? There's a fault line that runs down the middle of our lives. And when it shakes and there's an earthquake and it cracks open, that is divorcing my words, divorcing my actions from the truth that I hold within, what happens is this: things around me also begin to shake. It's not only me shaking, the rest of the earth is shaking, and they start to fall apart. That's why one ancient mystic by the name of Rumi also discovered, if you are here unfaithfully with us, you're causing terrible damage. Did you hear that? If you are here with us unfaithfully, in other words, things we hide all the time is not the real you. If you are that person, if there's anger in you and you're here, if there's this sense of dividedness in you and you are here unfaithfully, and it'll cause terrible damage. Private and public life, they don't jive, is a breach of integrity. There's one more I see. There's a secular and sacred divide. Meaning there's a breach in what we term religious, the other is non-religious. And so Sunday is religious life, Monday is business life. And the two are not the same. Right? Today is Good Friday, Easter Sunday, Christmas Day. But all other days, my day. I live it the way I want to. It puts God in terms of an idol. That this God, only lives in the sanctuary. This God only knows you when you're here. But when you're out of here, that God that you think you're worshiping, in your mind is largely absent, because no longer is He Lord of your other lives apart from the church life, the religious life, the sacred life. And so we become religious at certain times of the year, certain days of the week, and the rest of the days we spend irreligiously. Remember Joseph? Of course, you know Joseph. When that woman enticed him, "Come, take me, here I am, I'm all yours." And Joseph said, "Wait a minute, it's the Sabbath. I can't do that." Did he say that? Not at all. He said, "You know what? Regardless of the day of the year, how can I do this great evil and sin against my God?" And we didn't even know it's a Sabbath or not. He didn't say, wait a minute. It's synagogue day today. Can't do that. The secular, sacred divide. There's more. When my behavior doesn't back my beliefs. And of course, we all fall guilty with this, because sometimes we fail to stand on our own convictions. We profess one thing, but when the times get tough, that profession shakes, because we're not really sure we believe that anymore, because we're under pressure. You remember the story of this man who was mountain climbing by himself. And as he was mountain climbing, suddenly he tripped and fell. And he fell on this really very deep gorge, a cliff. And as he was falling down, he was trying to grab anything that he could grab on that side of the cliff. And finally there was this overhang of a tree branch that was hanging, and he was able to clutch on that tree branch. And he began to look down, and just thousands of feet down there, oh my. He looked up, hundreds of feet up there. There was nobody in sight, and therefore he cries out, "Lord, save me! Lord, save me!" And suddenly there's this voice from the heavens and said, "Okay, I'm going to save you. But here's what you do. Let go." And the man says, "Let go." God says, "Do you believe in me?" He says, "Of course I believe in you." "Then let go." And so the man looks down, thousands of feet. He looks up. He doesn't see anything. And then he cries out, "Is there anyone up there or down there? Help! Save me!" You know how it is. We may have professions of faith. I believe this, I believe that. We can have the perfect creed. But when the times get tough, do we really believe it? Do we really? And so, sometimes in persecution times, when those days come, will you really stand up for your faith? What if somebody came in here and it's really possible that somebody would just storm into this door, right, with an AK-47, and he asks each of us, who are you, our followers of Christ? Remain seated. Maybe all of us will stand up and run away, right? Behavior doesn't back belief. That's a breach in integrity. There's one more, and I'll end with this one. When we put a price tag on sins, certain sins, smaller sin, bigger sin, the Reformers have taught us that all sin is mortal. Because every sin deserves death. Every sin, no matter how small, every sin is mortal. One sin, death, regardless of severity, regardless of how serious those sins are, no matter what the impact in society is, one sin, death. So even the slightest sin is an act of cosmic treason. All sins alienate us from God. And of course, we fail to feel the gravity of our actions to this degree, but it is nonetheless true. And so, when we begin to categorize sin, now, mind you, some sins are grave. Some sins are indeed terrible. They're terrible in the sense of its social impact. But every sin has a spiritual impact, and they're all the same. It is treason against God. And so when we quantify sin and say, this is just small, that's big, I won't do those, but I can do this because they're small. You know what happens? You become less of a man, woman of integrity. Lusot. You know that word? Lusot. And I'm sorry for those of us who don't understand this weird word, lusot. Lagay, bribery, greasing our relationships so that we can get through even though they might be compromising, right? It's just small. You see, when you begin to think this way, then we're losing our wholeness, a breach of integrity. Solomon tells us the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Now, brothers and sisters, here's what I reflect upon my life after many years of being a husband and a father. The only real power I have as a leader of the home to effect change for the glory of God, the only real power I have as a leader, not my words, not even the strength or loudness of my words, those are powerless. It is not my money to pay my kids and say, do this, do that, I give you money. They might be effective, but only for a short time. You see, the only real power I have with my children is this, the example of my integrity. The only reason my kids can obey is because I do it also. And if I tell my kids, do this, do that, but I don't do it myself, they have all the reason not to do it. And so the only reason you can give them to follow you is to show your example of integrity. That's it. That is all the power we have. Nothing more. Everything else is material, temporal. But the only power I have, my character. And see how important it is? That David, it says, he shepherded them with the integrity of his heart. Now, he's not perfect. We're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But you see, you know what the solution is to a broken heart? And David's heart has been broken many times. You might not think of David as the man after God's own heart. You might think of David as the man after Bathsheba's heart. He killed the husband. Can you imagine? And as a result, His family was divided. That was the judgment of God. And yet, it says, He shepherded them with integrity of heart. Why? You see, we can have the most broken family in this life. But that is not the final word. Because you see, in order to be people of integrity, there's still one thing we can do, even though things are broken. Like David, we confess. We confess before God this division in our hearts. And we take the consequences of our actions. And God puts your heart back together. I'll move on because time is short. The lead shepherd teaches life mastery. And so here it is. I take responsibility. I become a man of integrity. You see, those two things are all about me. It's not about them. But you see, when you get that two things together, taking responsibility and trying to be the man I ought to be under God, living a life that is whole, not divided. So here it is. Now I teach my children certain skills to live this life. And so it's life mastery. And there are things they need in order to live this life successfully. And I'll be quick. First, to be a great prayer. Not simply to pray to God, but to be a prayerful person. Because to be a prayerful person means you are vitally connected to your Father. And that is the most important thing we live our children, for them to fear the Lord. Not to fear us, but to fear the Lord. That is the greatest gift we can give to our children, because that is the beginning of everything. Fear God. Learn how to be attached to God. Learn how to have a living relationship with the Father in heaven. It tells us, so that you, your son, your grandson might fear the Lord your God. Keep all His statutes and His commandments. Now, you might think, Pastor, how do we do that? My kids are adults. Some of them are no longer with me. That's fine. And I understand that. It may not apply every single day of your life, but there are still some things we can do, even though we might have apostolic ministries, taking care of the grandchildren. I call it simply a blend of ritual and reality. And the two always go together. Ritual, spiritual disciplines, family altar, devotions, praying together as a family, reading scriptures together as a family. These are rituals. Everything we're doing here is a ritual. The Sunday school is a ritual. Bible study is a ritual. Everything, spiritual disciplines, they're all ritual. But you see, the ritual without reality becomes empty. And the reality that we need to bring into our families is this: God is real, and we need to show how God is real in our lives. And so we need to be ourselves firmly connected to Him. God, what are you doing in my life? God, what sins have I committed that you're forgiving? God, what prayers are you answering? And Lord, here are the trials our families are facing. My children are going through this. Bring them to the throne of grace and say, Lord, help us together. And when God answers, see, God is real. So it's not empty, let's study the Bible. It's not empty, let's pray. But it's filled with reality. And sometimes the reality is simply being totally honest and say, you know, my wife, I'm tired. You know, my wife, I haven't been leading. You know, once I remember when my first daughter was born, our first child was born, we were still in the seminary. And I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to be the best student in this class. I'm going to graduate with honors. You know, and I needed to work to get through the seminary studies. And so I was working. I had 4 jobs. I was studying full-time altogether. Then we had our first child. And suddenly one night I saw my wife. She was in tears. She was crying. And I said, what's wrong? And I said, well, I feel like I'm the only parent really taking care of this baby. And you know what my first gut response to that was? In my mind, I said, we're in seminary. This is what we're here for. We are trying to be the best we can be to serve the Lord together. Can you imagine? And I'm working 4 jobs. Yeah, it's easy to excuse, isn't it? In fact, I was being proud in my mind. In fact, being totally out of sync, right? But then I cried as well before her because I realized, man, this is hard. It's hard. It's hard to be a true man. But by God's grace, it's possible. And so with our kids, we show them how we struggle as well. How with God's help and God's grace. See, sometimes they don't see the grace of God in our life because we're so perfect. Or at least we try to show them we're always perfect. No, we're not. And so when I tell my kids, you know what? Yes, I tried marijuana before. Oh, yes, I get drunk before. Oh, yes, when I take tanduay, hangover is terrible. Better drink gin, not rum. And when I say these things, wow, my dad, he's a real guy. But of course, you don't tell them those things simply because you want them to be like you. You share those things because you've learned big lessons as a result, isn't it? So, a blend of ritual and responsibility. Be a great prayer. Second is be a good neighbor. Teach them to have a healthy regard for others. You see all these verses? Pursue peace with all men, the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. Practice hospitality. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. For he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to his edification. You see, in the Bible, there's a lot of verses about one another, about how we interact with our social environment, because we're social beings. Not only do we have a vertical relationship with God that we need to teach our children, but how to communicate. How do we communicate with one another is being a good neighbor. And so I learned to use my words. I learned not to manipulate people by my moods. I learned not to show my face in order to somehow control your response to mine. I learned to open up and share with words how I feel. And I learn not only to communicate truthfully and lovingly, I learn how to resolve conflict as well. And I don't let it go. I don't ignore. I resolve them properly under the grace of Jesus Christ. It's so important, isn't it? That our children know how to be a good neighbor to one another here in church and even outside. You know what our Constitution and bylaw says? If you get a copy of the CICC Constitution and bylaws in Article 5, principle, under the heading Principles in letter C, it goes like this. We, CICC, we also engage to maintain family and personal devotion, to educate our children in the ways of the Lord, to seek the salvation of our kindred and acquaintances. And then listen to this one. To walk righteously in the world, to be just in our dealings, faithful in our engagements, exemplary in our deportment, avoiding tattling, avoiding backbiting, avoiding anger. Be a good neighbor. A skill that we ought to learn and hand down to our children. And finally, one more life mastery skill. Be a wise decision maker. Now, we might think that decision making is only for the big stuff, and indeed they're important when we make major decisions in life concerning our three things. Three major decisions in life that are big. You'll find this in Proverbs 1, Proverbs 2. The choice of your master. Who will be your master? The choice of your mission in life. What will be your career? What is your calling in life? And the choice of your mate, your partner in life. These are the three big decisions you will make in life. Having said that, there are everyday decisions that we make. And these are the more elementary things that we need to teach the next generation. Everyday decision making. Small decisions of everyday life. I remember an article written by a great commentator back home. His name is Conrado de Quiros. He's a commentator on the Philippine Inquirer, the Daily Inquirer. Actually, what he wrote was a speech he made to the youth who were graduating. And in this speech, he writes these things. The choice rarely happens in life with a big C. The big dilemma never comes. What comes are small, unobtrusive, seemingly trivial dilemmas about whether one is to keep a dinner appointment with one's wife or follow up a lead, whether one is the time to watch a son's game or meet with an important client. Slowly, unwittingly, unconsciously, you could start yielding to the pressures of what passes for this world. And what is terrifying about that is this: you are never really aware that it's happening to you. That is so because the bargain is not like the devil offering you all the joys of the 7 cardinal sins in exchange for your soul. The devil doesn't do that. It is invariably the small, everyday decisions, the decisions about bending the rules to help my kin, to help my friend. Exception to the rules today because of my ninong's pakiusap. You see, it's not the big choice you have to fear, it's the small concessions. Those are the ones that really tell. Those are the ones that take their toll on us. They all lead to blindness, callousness, the suspension of conscience, and eventually the deadening of our soul. Jesus once said, wisdom is proved right by all her children. You know what does that mean? Luke 7:35. Wisdom is proved right by all her children. In other words, the proof that we are wise people is in the results produced by the decisions we make. That is the proof that we are wise. Very quickly, how do we teach our children making proper decisions? I'll be quick. First, tell them to stop before leaping. Hold on. You know, our kids, they like rash decisions, quick decisions. You say, stop. Hold on, don't leap yet. Think. Think before acting. Ask why. Why do you want to do this? What's your motivation? Because often children are conflicted deep inside. It boils down to our children between what's right and what's popular. Right? They know what's right, but this is popular. And sometimes it's the popular that has the stronger force on our kids. So tell them, stop, think. Think, why are you doing this? And third, what are your options? For example, you say friends want to start to do pot, marijuana. Anyway, it's legal. Let's try it. Right? Let's try it. And your friends say, come, everybody, let's do it. See, you stop, you think, why am I going to? What are my options? See, you have options. And the options are this. I'll try it. I will not try it. I'll ignore my friends. Or I will try to convince them the other way around. See, there's plenty of options. It's not just one option all the time. There's plenty. What are the options? Fourth, what are the outcomes of those potential options? In other words, help them to think, how much trouble will I get in if I go this way? And you know, sometimes they do get into trouble because we're too late in stopping them. And when it's too late and you catch them in the act, don't discipline them yet. But process in their minds what happened. And say, stop, think, go through these things and say, it'll help them realize and learn better so that tomorrow they don't do it again. And so there are outcomes. What are those outcomes? What trouble will you get in? And so they need to judge what are the risks, what are the rewards of certain decisions that they need to make. You see, normally they would overestimate the benefits and underestimate the cost, isn't it? And so for us, we can show them what those are, rather than say to them, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. You see what's happening? They don't know the reasons. They're not taught how to think properly. And therefore, they simply look at you as authoritative. They don't understand. Help them understand. Teach them how to think. Teach them how to reflect. Teach them the fear of the Lord. And finally, people. That decision, what impact on the people around you? You see, our children initially tend to be so self-centered that they really don't care about their surroundings. What will it cost other people. Remember this, because I'm guilty of this all the time. Maybe some of the time, because I'm learning. Remember not to bail out your children when they do make wrong choices. Don't bail them out. And by that, what I mean is, you cover up. You settle the issue without going through a process of teaching. And you simply say, everything's resolved. You see, decision-making is a skill. And either you have good skill or bad skill. And the more we bail out our children, if they are bailed out over and over again because we love them, I'm sure it is. We shield them. But if we keep on bailing them out, they learn to develop bad habits of decision-making. Fathers, husbands, be the lead shepherd of the home, and by that take spiritual responsibility. Be a man of integrity. And teach life mastery. And Lord willing, our homes will be the strong family that it ought to be here in America. It's not too late. Never too late. Simple. Let's pray. Lord, you want to be a family of faith that is strong. And I know that for some of us, we should have heard such messages a long time ago. But it's never too late. We know that your grace keeps on extending. It keeps on transforming us, and therefore we are becoming more and more the men of integrity you want us to be. Lord, if there's anything we can really do this late in the ball game, change me. That even in the power of my example, imperfect as it is, the grace of God becomes so real that even in our old age, you teach us new tricks. Even as old dogs, we learn. And Lord, in that learning, our kids see us. And they say, wow, you are real. Imperfect, yes, we are. But by confessing our sins and living a life that is whole before you, Lord, we know you can make a difference. And so, here we are as your family in this church. And Lord, we want to entrust to you all our spouses. We entrust to you all our children. And Lord, may it be that from this day forward, we look at them with different eyes and we say, it's possible. God will strengthen us. He will work miracles in our families. In all these things, Lord, we'll be careful to return to you the praise, the glory, the adoration, because you alone are worthy. In Jesus' name, amen.